Hello, welcome back to the Perception Podcast, where we just see things a little bit differently. As always, I'm Dan, your host, and today I thought we'd do an episode on autism. Now, I thought I'd just give a little disclaimer from the outset. I've not been fully diagnosed with autism. Instead, I don't want to say I've just, but I have autistic traits. But I'm currently in the process of getting a full diagnosis, so I think I can kind of talk about this, but if you think that I've not been as in detail as I could be, or you have anything to add, always leave them on our Facebook page or anywhere associated to the podcast. But yeah, I just wanted to put it out there. Obviously, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just going off my experiences. In the last week, I found that I've had to talk about autism a lot more than I would usually have to. I had to talk to a professional about it and even mentioned it whilst in class for the first time, which is not like me at all. I was actually inspired because I believe it's something like National Autism Awareness Week, and a student in my school prepared a presentation to spread awareness on it. I think it might have been last week. I actually know very little about all the kind of disability awareness kind of weeks and days around in the year, basically. I'm so bad at that sort of thing. For somebody that suffers with quite a bit, like physically and mentally, I'm really bad at keeping up to date with all the days. But yeah, my school's kind of really been in depth with it recently and been talking about it a lot more. So yeah, this kid kind of prepared a presentation on it and actually motivated me and inspired me to be a lot more open with it than I normally would be due to my social anxiety, which could kind of stem from the autism side of things. So yeah, today I thought I'd just talk about my experiences with autism and how I feel about talking and open up about it now. So I always kind of start these discussions about all the different difficulties that I kind of go through and all the kind of things I've learned about during my life, like explaining how it affects my daily life. And this is always a really hard thing to do, because if you're somebody that has mental or physical difficulties, you know that you see professionals a lot, or at least I know I do. And I always ask you, how does it affect you? What does it feel like? And it's a harder question than it would first seem, because stuff like this, stuff like physical disabilities, like I've got cerebral palsy, that kind of thing just becomes your normal, because you have to deal with it every day. And it might sound a bit weird, but because you have to kind of deal with it every day, it becomes, I think I've talked about this a bit before, but it becomes your normality. And when you try and explain why it's so different, you can't really elaborate on it too much, because you've never really experienced the normal, like they like to put it. You've never really experienced that normal life, that normal existence. So it's really it's actually a really difficult discussion to have. Why do you think you're different to somebody else? And autism is one of those things where you can often have it and not even notice your differences, really, because it's a very mental thing, because it kind of takes over your everyday actions a lot, or at least I know I do. You don't really notice it that much, and when somebody tells you, oh, you've done this kind of not weird thing, but you've kind of done this unusual thing, or I've noticed this thing in the last few months, you're like, oh my god, I didn't even realise. And then you suddenly think back and you're like, oh yeah, I did do that. But autism is one of them things where it's like a silent, I don't want to say a silent killer, because it's not a killer, but do you know what I mean? It's a silent, it's almost like a ninja that kind of creeps up and you don't even know that it's there. And it's one of them things, once you know you have it or you experience it, or even with autistic traits, even though when you're associated to the word of autism, because it's such a broad spectrum and stuff like that, and you will never really understand why you're different to a normal person's experience. It's always kind of weird just to know that you are different, and it's really hard to differentiate. As you can probably hear by me trying to explain it, it's a very it's just very difficult to kind of define and elaborate on, because it's such a unique experience for everyone. That's why it is a spectrum, and that's why nobody kind of, even though there are different conditions like ASD and Asperger's and stuff like that, I don't even know that much about it myself, but it's even though they do put boxes on it, everybody's experience is different, and it's always hard for somebody to go, I like it when people ask me questions about my difficulties. It's better than them staring or just talking behind my back. But autism is always the one that I find it difficult to answer, because with my cerebral palsy, I can just go, well, it makes me walk differently. It makes my legs hurt or stuff like that. With autism, I can't really tell straight away how it's affecting my daily life. And I actually wanted to talk a little bit about how my experiences with autism actually kind of birthed this podcast, because as you know, it's obviously called the Perception Podcast, and I think more than anything, the way autism has kind of manifested itself in me and has kind of affected my life is with my perception. And I often think, like, before, if I was thinking one way, trying to make a decision big based on me principally, like what I would do, it's often then skewed by like my desire for a structure and stuff like that comes from my autistic tendencies, and that can, it sounds like a little thing, but that can completely like change and change your life between what you consider normal, and then the new autistic kind of tendencies and ways kind of then envelop your life and overwhelm you in ways that you don't even really fully comprehend, because it, as I keep trying to say, it just becomes your new normal. And as I say, it's this kind of silent enemy that you're not enemy, but it's kind of this silent thing that you have to get used to, that you don't even know it's kind of having such a big effect on your life that it really is. Because I don't know if I've said this on here before, but I feel like physical things, like obviously cerebral palsy, I've got cerebral palsy and I can never cure that. I can make it better at times, but it always be there. I feel like with mental things, it's such more of a bigger battle. I feel like anyway. For other people, it might be different, but I feel like me mentally to try and compete. What am I trying to say? Compete with all these things in my mind. I find it a lot harder and draining to try to think, oh, I've autism. My autism has made me think this way, or has made me act this way, and I should probably like kind of work on that in the future. And then I'm feeling anxious today and it stopped me from doing that, and thinking of all these different things, all of these things that aren't blatantly obvious to me and I have to kind of work out myself is really hard. And to work it out in your own mind, which is affected by these things anyway, it feels like you're fighting a losing battle. That's the saying I was trying to look for. But yeah, it's just like you're competing with something that already has control of you in a way, and you're competing to get some kind of level of control back. And that's what it feels like with autism, because people notice you doing things sometimes where it's just like that you've never done before and you wouldn't notice yourself, and they suddenly catch you and talk to you. Not in a nice way necessarily, but just like tell you, oh, you did this thing, and you don't even notice. And it's like, well, I have to try and work on that, but I don't really know how, because it's this, it's all just mental. And I know I'm not the most well articulated when talking about these sort of things, but yeah, that's just the point I wanted to get across. And it's the point that one of the students who made the presentation actually inspired me to stress, that people with autism often need more time to communicate, because they can often be battling with things in their mind that they don't even know themselves, which takes them longer to communicate or process information and stuff like that. And I thought that was a really important point that I didn't even realise really, that's why we often do things that are considered weird and unusual and take longer to process things, because we're kind of having to compete with ourselves, which is like unusual to do yourself. Normally it's just you're supposed to be the only person on your side, and it's kind of feels like one half of you's trying to affect you in a negative way and the other half is trying to battle back against that. So yeah, I thought that was just a really interesting point. And the kid that actually did this was younger than me, so it just proves the point that however old you are, you can learn about your mental health and be educated. And because autism is a spectrum and everybody sees and experiences it in a different way, we can all help out each other with our experiences, which again is just what I'm trying to do, just sharing it on here really. So yeah, I thought that was just a really good point, and I hadn't thought about it like that before, so I just wanted to talk about that here. And I also thought I'd talk about my experiences with other people with autism, and something that you really have to kind of understand when you kind of find out and figure out that you've got certain difficulties that other people might not have, is that 99% of the time there is always going to be somebody that experiences a more severe level of it, or as I say, experiences it in a different way. So I often find that actually seeing people with different types of autism, or maybe more severe types of autism, and chatting to them and stuff like that, that helps me kind of learn ways to deal with it a bit more. Like that presentation did, it helped me see it in a new light. And I often feel like seeing people with more severe autism can kind of I don't know, like shed it in a positive light, because having extra difficulties and having physical and mental difficulties can often feel like you can often feel kind of like, why me, and feel very like selfish about it, like why did it have to be me and stuff like that. And I feel like seeing other people that suffer from the same things but also very differently can put it in perspective and show how, even though you're not lucky necessarily to have it, you are kind of privileged to maybe not have it as severe. And maybe I know that in my case, I'm quite lucky to be able to, I don't know, I know I'm not that well articulated, but I'm lucky to be able to articulate myself in the first place. And that is why I also wanted to start something like this, to be able to share my views for some people that may not be able to and stuff like that. And I often feel like, yeah, just talking and seeing people with other types of difficulties and other types of autism especially can either help you find ways to deal with it that you've not yet thought of, or you just helps you educate yourself about your own condition. Really, as I say, I'm still learning myself. I'm 17, and anytime anybody asks me about my disabilities or my difficulties, I always have to direct them to my mum, because I know nothing, and that's it's not a bad thing, but it would help to know a bit more myself, because it might help me to deal with it a bit more. But yeah, I think seeing and reading people online, especially other people's experiences with it, can often help. And otherwise, seeing people with more severe challenges can also put in perspective, and kind of if they're getting on with it and they're doing a brilliant job dealing with their issues and getting through their difficulties, it often can motivate yourself to kind of go, right, if they can do it, I can do it. And it can kind of motivate you to keep going and not have this kind of negative view around disability and difficulties and stuff like that, and more take it as, it gives you a bit more resilience is what I'm trying to say. It gives you kind of take it in your stride, rather than seeing it as a negative thing on your part. That's the only way I can put it. I know there's better ways to put it, but not seeing it in such a negative light, and kind of seeing it as a strength to your bow, that it kind of adds this resilience that maybe other people your age might not have experienced yet, because they haven't had to face such difficult challenges at such a young age. And then moving on to talking about it with other people, I know myself that I'm very sheltered mentally. What do I mean by that? I'm kind of cornered off mentally. I don't really speak about how I'm feeling or how I'm doing to a lot of people. Obviously, your teachers ask you, and I feel like the best answer to say there is just I'm fine and stuff like that. I feel like the only person that I really open up to is my mum. And as I say, for the first time in class, like today actually, as I'm recording this, is the first time. Obviously, everybody knows that I've got a physical disability because I have a wheelchair and stuff like that. But even though they might have guessed it by how I communicate and just how I socialise and stuff like that, I actually was able to actually say outright in one of my lessons, when answering a question, kind of relating it to it, that I do have autism. And even though that might sound like such a little thing, I actually was quite proud of myself for that, because I've always been quite scared of being different and being viewed as different, and being able to kind of communicate that with others that might have guessed it or might have worried that there was something else going on. I think that's a big step for anybody to kind of admit that, not only to other people but also to themselves, and having the confidence to not be afraid of who they are. And I've always found communicating to others, even my family, even my closest family, the only person I've ever really been able to open up to, and even that's not fully, is to my mum. And that's maybe only like 3 times a year that I actually sit down and talk to her like properly about it. So I feel like learning to accept who you are, and like people love to say, like you have to love yourself to love others and stuff like that. I feel like it can always help to kind of, as I've said in the past, just release the weight off your shoulders. And especially with something like autism, it can only help to spread awareness about it and prevent the ignorance from growing, because I feel like that's a lot of the time where bullying and stuff like that comes from, is just kids being ignorant of it and not knowing really what it is, and just viewing it as some kind of oh, if you have autism, you must just be stupid or something like that. And if you actually educate people instead of just saying you can't say that about people and stuff like that, if you actually educate them on what autism actually is, I think that can only help. And as I say, just helps to reduce the ignorance and then hopefully the bullying, and not even bullying, but just the lack of communication that there is around it. That normal families, I say normal, I don't know the word for it, but you know what I mean, like people that don't have these extra difficulties just don't know about it really, and that leads to all this extra social challenges that people with autism and stuff like that have to face. Where I think if people knew a little bit more about it and were educated a bit more on it, I think they'd be a lot more accepting and willing to let the kids process information slower and let them like communicate how they want to communicate because they find it more difficult. I feel like talking about it with others can be a big step and it can take a while, but it can only help in the long run. I also thought I'd talk about my PIP assessment actually today as well, because I really think that I was actually taken aback by it, actually like quite disappointed with not only government but just the country in general. Is that for the PIP thing, obviously if anybody that's ever gone through it knows you have to have a lengthy discussion outlining what difficulties you have and like all stuff like that, and it's quite a horrible conversation to have because nobody likes, especially somebody that have difficulties like this, you always like to think of yourself as quite resilient and you don't let it get in your way or anything like that, and it's kind of just like outlining all of the stuff that you struggle with. It's quite demoralising. But anyway, my point is, anybody that's ever had a PIP claim or anything like that will know what that kind of is like, and having to go through that, it's just a not very enjoyable experience. And I have found that when I recently had to do my PIP claim, I did the conversation, it was all good. Then we got it back and they said for going outside and travelling on my own that I scored 0 out of 12. And this was a real point of contention for me, because if it had been anything else, if it had been anything reasonable, then I would have been like, fair enough, you know, they're well within their rights to do that. But for something like that, it was so obvious that my anxiety and my autism and stuff like that impedes me from going out and being independent on my own, doing things that any normal teenager would. That I felt that I had to appeal it and kind of I don't want to say protest, but just like just appeal the decision and just like kind of argue my side of it, because I feel like assessments like that, I know that they have to be done and stuff like that to ensure that the people that are getting it do deserve it and stuff like that. But I feel like it's kind of hard anyway for somebody that suffers with all this. And I know when I say that, I'm not the worst person in the world. Like, I don't have the worst difficulties in the world. But even for somebody that suffers what I go through, which is very minimal compared to others, it's really difficult to talk about this sort of thing and then have to read an assessment that basically says that we don't believe that you actually have. Not we don't believe, but we don't believe to the extent that you have this problem, and it doesn't impede you as much as you say it does. That kind of makes you question whether your difficulties are even like worth the trouble, if you just should kind of shut up and get on with it. And I feel like for a world that is getting more and more socially responsible and stuff like that, I feel like it's really stupid to still have an assessment where people that don't have to experience it on a daily basis, people that have never experienced autism or cerebral palsy or anxiety or depression or anything like this, can then decide whether they feel like somebody actually experiences it on a daily basis. I feel like that's a really stupid decision making system, and I know that when I basically had to appeal and say, well, this actually does really impede me, it was just kind of demoralising and made me wary to talk about it in future, because would people believe me, and would people even have empathy for me, or would they just say like, shut up, get on with it? So obviously I've got quite a thick skin, and even though I'm talking about it like that, at the end of the day, I know what I go through, and I know what my challenges are on a daily basis, and while they're not the worst, they are definitely there. So I'm quite assured of like myself, but I know that other kids that may be younger even, or might not have as thick a skin as me, that could really be demoralising and kind of set back all the progress with not just racial, gender, but also disability discrimination in the world there has been recently. And I feel like for a government assessment that like everybody with a disability has to do, to my knowledge, I just feel like that's a really stupid decision making system. And I thought, like, while I was just talking about autism and open up about it a bit more, I just thought I'd kind of leave this bit here to kind of, yeah, just give my piece on how silly I think this is, and how this is only going to deter youngsters and young people from spreading awareness about it in future, in fear that they're going to get ridiculed for not, for basically lying. Do you know what I mean? And it's not as bad as they say it are. And I just think that can only be negative. Do you know what I mean? I feel like when talking about mental health and when talking about disability, while positive discrimination is not a good thing either, you just have to be really, you just have to listen really, and not act like you know exactly what somebody else is going through and what their experience is. Because as I've kept saying, even though I have autism, even though I have cerebral palsy, even though I have these things, if somebody else came up to me and said, yeah, I've experienced similar things to you, this and this, but I also have this thing, maybe I've never experienced that before, and I listen to them, and I accept that maybe their condition is more severe than mine. You can never go, I don't believe you, do you know what I mean? Because you never know what's going on in their head. But yeah, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but I thought I'd just leave this bit here because I think that is, for a developing society, I just think that that's something that definitely needs to change in the future. And as I touched on there, I can't stress enough how important it has for me how important it's been for me to find people that have similar experiences to me and kind of share their stories, to kind of accept myself and accept who I am as a person. And even though this podcast isn't groundbreaking, there's other people that do it and stuff like this, even though there's blogs and stuff like that, even if this is heard by like 5 people ever, do you know what I mean? I feel like it's important just to have these things accessible to anyone who maybe even in 10 years can go and think, oh yeah, and find similarities and find that they're not alone with their struggles. Because even if I'm not as severe as them or anything like that, they can, as I say, they can find similarities and find maybe the what am I trying to say? They can find the I don't know what I'm trying to say, but they can find the normality that within other people in the community with autism, they can see that as normal, whereas the outside world, the normal school environment, can often paint you as different and stuff like that. That's what I'm trying to say, I think. But yeah, I feel like stuff like this is so important to spread awareness and stuff like that. And even though this podcast isn't groundbreaking, there's other stuff like it that is much more informative and much just better generally than this. And I feel like stuff like that is so important, because even though it is a broad spectrum, I feel like it helps so many people to know that they're not alone, and that they do have other people that can be there for them and just lend an ear when everybody else is just kind of trying to ridicule them and stuff like that. Which out of this ignorance that I'm talking about, and I don't really blame for people for having that ignorance, because it's just the fear of the unknown at the end of the day. So it really helps when somebody that maybe doesn't know 100% but maybe knows 10% can be there to understand it a bit more and just be there for you, really. Even if it's through a YouTube video, even a song, do you know what I mean, on the radio. That's why stuff like that can provide so much comfort, because they make the differences, but they make the differences that somebody might have appear more normal than the rest of society makes them out to be. So yeah, I know that was a bit of a ramble, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say there. And I thought for the debate today, we talk about a question like, should autism be talked about at school more often? And I think there can only be one answer to this, and that's yes, because as I've said before, there's still a lot of ignorance surrounding not just autism, but all sorts of difficulties that people may have. And if they feel comfortable, I think that more students should share their experiences and give their first-hand direct accounts, because not only is it not just complete medical talk, so like other kids might not get bored of hearing it, but there might be a bit more empathy there and a bit more acceptance if they can understand, if they can kind of compare it to their own lives and really understand what you're going through a bit more. And I feel like opening up about your difficulties can also show you in a light that you might not be able to give off socially because of autism or anything like that, and it might allow you to kind of it might allow students to talk on your own time and talk about what you want to talk about. So it kind of gives them a sense of freedom and not the social. I know they might get a bit of anxiety about talking about it in front of a class or anything like that, but it doesn't give them the social anxiety of, am I being perceived here right? Because they would get to plan it and talk about it themselves. So I feel like, especially although teachers talking about it and having medical professionals coming in and talking about it, that's obviously really good. But I feel like students, especially like the kid that did the presentation in my school, it wasn't in person, he sent it out over email, but even something like that is so beneficial. And as I've said, like even a 5-minute presentation like that has inspired me to talk about it more in school and inspired me to do this whole episode. So I feel like it's just so much better when it's encouraging the people going through it to open up more, and then it's encouraging people to be educated and not just being told off for saying the wrong thing or anything like that. It's actually educating them so there can be a genuine long-term difference and not a temporary quick that's just politically correct. Do you know what I mean? Also, I know personally that I've been in a lot of wellbeing classes, and if you don't know, that's like PSHE or whatever. I know a lot of schools call it a different thing. And we have a lot of classes on obviously like sexual health and healthy eating and mental health like anxiety and depression. And while these are important subjects, I feel like in a year we have maybe, maybe 50 of these classes, and about 80% of them are just repeating the same stuff on anxiety and suicide and depression and cyberbullying and stuff like that, rather than just going over it once really in depth and then moving on to a new thing. And I feel like if they kind of did that, have that one lesson instead of repeating themselves again and again with information that we already know, I feel like then there'd be a lot of room for maybe doing a lesson on Asperger's and doing a lesson on ADD and stuff like that. I feel like that could really provide the platform to somebody who maybe suffers with it themselves or even knows somebody that's going through it, could really step up and talk back to the class or even the teacher. Do you know what I mean? Even the teacher to talk about it. And I feel like in well-being, it's normally they hire a teacher, from my experience, that kind of does another subject and they kind of tick off the curriculum or something like that. But if they kind of open it up to all sorts of difficulties, not just autism, all sorts, body dysmorphia and stuff like that, I think it could only be beneficial. And again, just normalising it, I think, would reduce bullying and just it would help people to understand more rather than just telling them wrong and that they're different. It just, I think normalising it's the best thing, and something like these wellbeing lessons that we have is the best place to do it. And I just think they're not being utilised to the best extent that they could be. And autism is almost something that's just brushed under the carpet and is just only brought up when something goes wrong and somebody's told off for saying something that they didn't even know because they haven't had that much education on it. I just think it's this endless cycle of repeating behaviour because nothing's being done about it. And I think something like these wellbeing lessons seem so simple, but they're not being done. And I think if they were implemented more with more education on even physical difficulties, mental difficulties, all of these things, it could only help. And it's something so simple, but I don't know, maybe it's just not able to happen. But for me, it's just such an obvious change that would be so positive. But yeah, after my usual rant over stuff like that, I think I'm pretty much done. Remember to share and download if you're listening on the podcast streaming services, as always, and like, comment, subscribe if you're watching and listening on YouTube. You'll hopefully hear from me very, very soon, hopefully next week if I'm on schedule again. You'll hopefully hear from me very, very soon, and I'll see you later. Bye.